Good morning. It's another Monday is here, and I was going to give you guys some more tips and pointers. I think you're going to enjoy this one, particularly over toward the end. I got something really interesting to share with you. I'm going to jump into this thing and see if we can give you some tips and pointers. Hopefully this one won't be too long, so you can make your way all the way through it without having to bail out. This was on one of my sons. He's car poor because he's got a bunch of teenage sons that all drive and everything. And one of them started having troubles with his brakes, noticed fluid on the driveway and all that. And one of my sons, he's in his 40s, he looked in there and he saw that there were no brake pads left. They were all gone, you know. You see stuff like this all the time online, so this ain't really a big deal, but sometimes it'll wear these things all the way out without blowing the wheel cylinder on some vehicles. Sometimes it'll just blow the wheel cylinder. And that's when the first time anybody notices anything is wrong. The way brakes are designed is they're designed to work right up until the very end of when they can work. You know, that's the way they're put together. Of course, I did know this one guy that had his rotors turned too many times, and whenever the pads wore, it was on a 93 Camry, and when the pads wore down to a certain point, he had perfect brakes every time, and then one time he matched the brakes and the pads were so thin and the rotors were so thin it just shot the pads out of there. Suddenly he had no brakes, and he had to go over to the side of the road. You know, he was doing a merge and had to dodge a semi and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, I'm sure you guys have seen this kind of stuff before. There's all kinds of pictures of brakes on that's got incredibly interesting failures on there. So that's right here. If you come up to a 4-liter Jeep Grand Cherokee or Cherokee that's got this kind of a cam sensor synchronizer on it, and it's a no start, nobody's touched it, you open the hood, if you look down there and you see that this has moved, see that signature mark where that has moved, then that basically is telling you that this has locked up. And this particular vehicle, when the cam sensor quits putting out a signal, it won't run. A lot of other vehicles, you know, a lot of Fords and stuff, and even some of your Nissans, you can disconnect the cam sensor on a Nissan Altima, and sometimes it'll start and sometimes it won't. That kind of hogwash. On a Ford, typically, if you lost, you know, most Fords, if you lose cam sensor signal, it'll still run. It just throws you a code. This particular one, it kills it, and this was whenever you pull that apart. This was seized and locked up. Now on the Fords that have a similar cam sensor like this on the 3 liters, you may hear a squeaking noise that sounds a lot like bells. I've got a video of that somewhere, and that's because something similar to this has happened, or because the magnet has fell off of that sensor in there and has locked it all up, and it'll just make a mess out of everything. But the long and the short of it is, this seized up and it turned to that housing just a little bit. When you see that signature mark, you know the cat's on the roof, and it depends, you know, if it damages the gear, the cam gear that drives this, and you may have some big problems. So, you know, just take that as you will. This right here was another Grand Cherokee that was we were replacing the throttle position sensor because it was not returning to the you know, whenever you first switch on your key, you get your base, your closed throttle reading, if nobody's fooling with the throttle. And that's what it uses to decide if it's at idle or not. Well, this particular one, sometimes when you let off, it wouldn't go down to, you know, 0.8 of a volt, which is what its closed throttle reading was usually. It would stop at 1.37, and that was making the transmission do a harsh coasting downshift and garbage like that. And it turned out when we saw that on the scan tool, we said, well, this is no problem, we'll just change this. Well, these little torque screws would not come out of there. Pull the throttle body off, put it in a vise. This one here, the head came off of it. You could not screw it out of there with vice grips. And I used a little torch on here, you know, it could take to soften this this Loctite stuff. And believe it or not, the torch would not release that. But I used a heat gun, plain old shop heat gun, and when I heated it up with a heat gun, it loosened that up and this screw came out, and we were able to get new screws and put the throttle position sensor back on there. But you'd have thought a torch would have got it hotter than a heat gun, but it took the heat gun to get that out. This was the you know, smoking that it got from the torch, you know, and the kid initially didn't have the flame set right. But the long and the short of it was, it surprised me that a heat gun did better than a torch, heating up that Loctite and letting it release. Pickups that I bought here, you can see that there. And what I did was I took a BNC connector and put it in this pill bottle cap, and I wired one of these up, and look at when I'm just tapping that thing. I'm just tapping it. See that? See how sensitive that thing is? Alright, this makes a dandy transducer for if you gotta put it in something better than I'm putting it in this pill bottle jar. And I actually put this little fitting here. I can take my mouth if I can make that kind of impact, and I can set this on a lower setting whenever it goes across there. You can see how that would make you a really good transducer, can't you? It doesn't cost much. So that's a little something you can do to save money. Once again, you can buy these for nearly nothing on Amazon. You can see the... Now that product that you're seeing that was starting to fade out, I'm going to show you one. That one there, that particular one's discontinued on Amazon, but I'll show you in the next slide, you know, the one that's available now. But I use a little square box, which is really good. You need something like a little, you know, you can build it out of PCV, a really substantial little thing, but you have to have that acoustic sensor encased in foam so that it can feel pressure, but it doesn't rattle against the sides of it, because you don't want that moving around, you know, whenever you're doing that. But there's a guy that builds these things and sells them for a lot of money, but you can actually build this yourself, and it doesn't take long. It's not that hard to do. If you got BNC connectors and you got cable and stuff like that, you can build a neat little transducer, and you can use it for all kinds of stuff. You can connect it to the fuel rail, you can connect it to the intake manifold. It's that sensitive, and once you get to where you can interpret those readings, you know, you put it in the exhaust. On this particular one, just to demonstrate, I've actually put an exhaust on my Explorer with it connected to the scope. This was an old Viso scope I used to use that I really didn't like it that much, but you know, seems to me like I can't remember what I did. I gave that thing away or something. Long and short of it was, this is what it looked like whenever it was running with normal, you know, with no engine skip. When I unplugged number one injector, see how much difference it made? And that was just a hose that was just stuck up in the exhaust. And I thought you might find that very interesting there. You can also, if you've got a cone adapter, you can put this in the radiator neck, and you can look for pulses there too, you know, and stuff like that. So there's tons of stuff you can do with one of these transducers. And you don't have to spend lots and lots of money. If you buy one of these transducers that will do the job like this, you're going to pay $500 or $600 for it in a lot of cases. It's ridiculous. This is a guitar transducer is what it is. And this is the one you can still get on Amazon. You know, I should have put the link on here for you. But if you look that up, if you look up piezo disc, whatever, you'll get these. Yeah, you're going to pay like $7 for 12 of these? Really? I mean, what's the problem with that? You know, you can make a bunch of them transducers. Anyway, that's just something if you're a serious guy that wants it, and you use a scope. Now, this is not any good if you don't have a scope. So you need a scope if you're going to be able to use this transducer. Now, this right here is a BT608. I believe that it is the Autel. I've got one of these, and this thing will do all kinds of stuff. This is only scratching the surface of it. It'll do a relative compression test. It operates as a scan tool. If you get the right, it costs about, you're going to spend most of $1,000 on it if you get the adapters that go with it and everything. But it'll check the charging system. It'll actually print out a report. It'll actually make a report that you can email to your computer or to your customer or whatever. It's got a little temperature sensor where you test the temperature of the battery and let that be a part of the data point. And over here I connected it and did a relative compression test. See that? It gives you all of this information here. If you want an all-around tool that you can do a lot of stuff with, it's really worth the money. You can buy these from Autel, or you can buy them from Joey Henrich at aetools.us. aetools.us. BT608, I believe, is the number. I've got it over here. Periodically, you'll plug it in and do updates and stuff like that. You know, you connect it to your home network and all that. But this is a doggone handy tool. And anyway, let's move on. This was not a video that I captured myself, but I saw it online and I thought it was interesting enough. It illustrates exactly what goes on when you've got shocks that are totally shot and a tire that's out of balance. That's just funny as I'll get out to see somebody driving like that. I got another one where somebody had a fairly late model Ford and they were driving, and I guess the tire had come apart and come off, and the aluminum wheel was sitting on the pavement, and it had already squared off the bottom of the aluminum wheel. I've got that video somewhere. I should have put it on here. And it's just dragging that tire down the road, and the person just keeps driving. You know, it beats all I've ever seen, you know. This right here is a relay, the main relay that's on these Honda cars, and it's mounted under the dash in various different places. And the reason I'm showing you this is if you've got a random, occasional, intermittent no start on a Honda car, you know, that's in the roughly in the 2000s range, this relay is typically a good shotgun part. It doesn't cost that much, but if they're saying sometimes my Honda won't start, sometimes it starts, sometimes it don't, sometimes it starts, and I've fixed 2 or 3 whenever I'd say, look, I don't know if this is going to fix it, but I'm going to try this relay and let's just see what happens. And typically, if you've got a Honda that's in the, you know, like I say, 96 to 2008 or whatever, you know, whatever, I don't know how long they use this thing, but there's a many year models that has one of these main relays on it. Notice the jobs that it does. It's basically it's got fuel pump control, and it energizes the engine controller and all that kind of stuff, and it just does a lot of work. And typically the part of it that dies is the part that operates the fuel pump. And so, these aren't hard to put on there. I gave the schematic for it, you know, and the pinout and all that, so you could see how it was all connected and built on the inside. It's basically a couple of different relays in one, and they put it all together there. I don't know what they cost now, but it's been a long time since I bought one, but this is good information if you've got a intermittent no start on a Honda and you're scratching your head trying to get it to do it. And you can say, let's just try one of these because this is a known failure, you know. So a lot of you guys may have already seen this. This is something I used to teach my students to do. Whenever I first discovered the need for this was whenever I was working at the dealership. And some of those Bronco 2s had this little picture of nondescript vehicle image on the dash, and it had little LEDs that would come on when lights were out. Well, they had resistor wires built into the harness to make that happen, and that kind of thing. And so it was, somebody had just spliced into the wire harness to hook a trailer up, you know, just like you would on your old 60s model pickup or whatever. And it burned up the wire harness because it was, you know, pulling those trailer lights through those resistor wires. And then I've seen other people like that Thunderbird I was talking about one time destroyed the wire harness all the way. It was like a slow burning fuse, and it melted the wire, the tail light wire, the little 22 gauge wire, all the way up under the dash over here. The whole wire harness under that car dash had to be pulled out. Everything. It's a brand new car too. The guy put his own trailer tow on there, drove it a long way at night with the headlights on and the tail and the trailer lights burning, and it didn't blow a fuse. It just burned that wire, and that wire wired itself into a bunch of other wires. But I told my guys, I said, look, if you're going to put a trailer tow package on something, particularly a newer car, they make trailer tow adapter packages you can get and just plug in. But if you're, you know, don't want to take any chances, you want to make sure that you're doing a good job. You know, you're going to get 3 relays here. You're going to pull power from a dedicated fuse that's going to feed all 3 relays on the common terminal, and then you're going to go out to your trailer on the normally open terminal, and of course you're going to ground one side of the coil, and then your wires coming from your left turn, your tail lights, and your right turn is going to energize these relays. Now if you've got a yellow turn signal and a red brake light, you're going to get one of those little adapters and use it to drive these relays. Because those little adapters, they don't do so good carrying trailer lights either. The little adapters, I've had those come in the shop, those little adapters would burn out. But if you put that little adapter, you know, for the ones that's got the orange turn signals and the red stop lights, if you put that so that it's not going directly to the trailer, but it's using driving these relays, this doesn't cost a lot to do. You can put it in a little project box and keep these relays out of the weather back there and all that. And I used to have my students wire one of these up, and then we would test it on a little table I had that had some lights on it to make sure they wired it up right. And it was really nice to be able to, you know, teach them how to do that kind of thing. But knowing how to use relays will save you a lot of trouble using electrical repairs if you want to put something together that'll work right. This right here was an interesting tool that I don't know how many shops have one of these, but you put this in between the caliper and the brake rotor, and you just mash the brake, and then it pushes this little, you know, indicator needle up there, and it stays wherever this went to. And if you've got one that's pulling left or right, and you put one of these on each side of the car, the kit comes with two typically, and you mash that, see, it'll read up to many thousands of pounds, 5,000 pounds. These right here will, and you can buy these from Tooltopia and other places. You mash that brake. If you're seeing one side showing 2,000 and the other side showing 1,000, you know why it's pulling, because you're not getting as much pressure to one brake as you are the other. But then you got to find out why. Maybe the ABS unit, maybe a collapsed hose, maybe any number of things. But this is a good starting point, data point, if you've got brakes pulling and you're not exactly sure what's going on. And these aren't so terribly pricey that you can't afford them. Of course, if you're a do-it-yourself person working at home, you probably won't want to spend the money on these. But if you're a shop and you do a lot of brake work, I would definitely recommend this. There was a set at the college, and I had a set myself that I may have left at that other program I launched in the town up the road. I don't know, but anyway, these are really handy to have. Now this right here is a stress test on a Ford cop coil. This is Ford sanctioned now, and it's counterintuitive to put the coil upside down so that it can't fire to anything. You put this little pickup on top of it here that is reading from the top of the coil. I'm talking about this kind of coil here. With it pointing up in the air and you reading off of it, this is a good coil, this is a bad coil. And this was something that Ford came out with. So for years and years and years, those of us that are familiar with ignition coils that have done a lot of work would tell people, don't make it so, you know, if you're going to disconnect a plug wire and drive the car, make sure you ground the plug wire so that you're not, you know, causing all that high voltage spike that's looking for somewhere to go. On this particular thing here, Ford tells you to do this. This is an illustration from a Ford shop manual on this kind of coil. There's a bunch of other ways you can do it too. If you've got a let's say that you're in a pickle and you don't got the power balance function on your scan tool and you're out there trying to work on one. If you got a spark tester, you know, one of those that's adjustable, and you can adjust it out to where it's taking like 50 or 60,000 volts to fire. You can check each coil one at a time while the engine's running, and the one that won't jump the longest gap is typically going to be your bad cop coil. Most everybody's got this down pat anyway by now, but this is something that I don't know if you knew about it or not. This is actually, we're doing this on the IDS, on that one there. Now this was one I worked on my dad's Grand Marquis in the driveway, and he had a Misfire that was flashing the check engine light and cutting up. Alright, and so I got this little adapter here that I hooked up to the scope, and I got it from the AES Wave. Ordered it from out there at Carlos. Anyway, you connect that thing to the scope. I got this on coil number 5. And then I replaced coil number 5 and I got this. But this gathering data and sorting it out and interpreting it is how you figure out what's wrong and you fix things. And that's what I did here on his car. And of course, typically I like to put the plugs in anyway, but you can put a set of plugs in it if you still got a bad coil. You're still going to have a skip. And so that was what I did on his. And this right here, the clutch thing, you know, there's all kinds of stories I could tell you about clutches. But I don't know, you guys, it's like, clutches are like brakes, but they don't wear out. Sometimes they'll last the life of the car if the person knows how to drive. If they don't know how to drive, like when I was teaching these students how to drive on this old ratty old 94 Escort wagon I had with a stick, they love to drive that thing all over the campus up there. And I taught them how to drive it up on a drive-on lift, you know, without driving off the end and all that. But that clutch was in such bad shape on that Escort. They just, you know, it actually got hot enough to where it cracked this pressure plate, and all of the lining was gone off of here. And, you know, of course, it's down in the bottom of that. Sometimes your throwout bearing will come apart, and you'll find a bunch of noise like that. But anyway, that's just neither here nor there. You know, do what you will with that. It's fun to look at the clutch failures sometimes. This is a scope cart that I built, and down at the bottom I had a pico scope in here. This was at the college, and I put a bearing hub that was still, you know, it was still had a decent bearing in it where it would turn, and I bolted it down, and I got this piece of PVC pipe, and I mounted it on that bearing hub, and I came up through here and I cut a hole exactly the right size or slightly larger, and I put used a rubber hose that was split around that hole for a grommet, and then I got this box from the now I had to shorten this because the cable that I got from Radio Shack to run to these BNC ports out here, the 4 ports, you know, for your 4-tray scope, that wire wasn't long enough to go down through here and all the way up. Seemed like I might have drilled a hole in there or something. Anyway, I had to shorten this, but it was way too tall here for the, you know, to use the roll of cable I got from the BNC cable. But anyway, I had some adapters down here, but I was building this scope cart, put that piece of plywood down there and all that, and it worked out really well. And there's a couple of places you'll see where I'm using it, you know, in some of these videos. But there's a lot of guys on that I know on these mechanics Facebook pages and all that have built some absolutely beautiful scope carts with great big huge monitors or you know, LCD TVs and all that kind of stuff. This was my version of that, and that's probably, I'm gonna say 15 years ago I built this, maybe, or something like that, and it really worked out well. It had a pico scope. I had plexiglass here, you know, forming the top of this, because this was one of them carts that had a little, you know, bend in there, and then I put the computer on top of it, and the pico scope was underneath that, and you could, you know, and these were actually color coded, and you could, and I had the cables all hooked up. Anyway, whatever. Now this right here was something you might find interesting, or you might not, because this one's so old. But this is one I fixed at the dealership. This was a Bronco 2, 88 model, and it came in there running all crappy and everything, and sometimes black smoking and all that. And what I found out was they had connected the oxygen sensor ground, which is supposed to connect to the back of the head, to the upper intake because it was easier to get to. Well, that's not a good ground, because you need to have that ground as close to the oxygen sensor as you possibly can. So on the back of the head works really well. On the upper intake does not work so well, because this was the oxygen sensor signal here, this little yellow trace right down here. This was on the service bay diagnostic system that had the old CRT screen, and couldn't do a screenshot on it or anything, but so I had to take the picture with the lights and, you know, reflecting off of it. After I moved the ground back to the back, I got this, which is a lot better. It wasn't bouncing around down here. Sometimes the voltage will be really high instead of really low. But I got a sort of a nice, decent little switch, but I didn't like the range of it. You know, it was still too narrow a range. This was what happened after I put a new oxygen sensor on it. Now, a new oxygen sensor got that straightened all out. There was also some bad grounds there at the battery. I straightened those out. And so a lot of this was ground related. Part of it was replacing the sensor. And so for what it's worth, there it is. Remember that oxygen sensor ground. I don't know how many times I've seen them come in there black smoking because somebody had done some work and they left this ground loose, and it was dancing around loose on the back of the head. It's hard to get a picture of that. But I actually, you know, brightened that up a little bit so you could see that better than it was before. So take that for what it's worth. Now this is I saw this in a parking lot the other day. This green '69 Chevelle, and my wife had one of these years ago when it was new, and she said that was like doing Mach 1 with your pants on fire driving that thing, because they had a 396 and a 3 on the floor. You know, and it would scream. There was another guy that I knew that had a 68 model that was a blue one, and he would drive that thing, and he liked to go fast. You know, this is back when we were in high school. And that speedometer on that thing would come all the way around that circular speedometer and bang the post on the bottom side. I mean, it was, you know, top end unlimited sort of a thing. But there was this guy, and I got to tell you this story, that was in North Alabama. He was talking about it. I was at a school up in Birmingham or somewhere, and he was telling about it. And back in the late 60s, like 68, maybe around the time this car was new, he had was just doing crazy stuff. You know, now the stuff you get thrown into the jailhouse for, they just pretty well slap your hand for back then. So he's driving this thing, going on a Friday night. He's just has got it. He's all excited because it's got this, you know, 396 in it, and it was Scream. And he's making the cops look like fools, and he's outrunning them, and he's driving between them and all this kind of stuff. And they get behind him. He just picks up speed until he leaves them behind. Well, this old sheriff came out with a 63 Chevy Biscayne with a overdrive transmission. You know, it's a 3-speed, 3 on the column, and you start off in first, and then you let off, and it engages a planetary in the transmission and gives you another gear. It's basically a 6-speed transmission, but it looked like a 3 on the tree. It's got overdrive. They did away with that about 1970, and then they came back with overdrive transmissions later that worked a different way. But he said that that sheriff got behind him on that Biscayne police interceptor that was a 63 model or something. And his car was like a 68 or 69, maybe 67. And he says he went down this long straight road going down into this valley up there. And that he had that Chevelle doing everything it could possibly do. It was wound out as far as it could go. It had all it could do. And then, you know, the telephone poles looked like a picket fence going by. And he says, and this old sheriff passed him, and he says, and I looked over at him when I passed him. I don't know how fast we were going, but whenever I looked over there, that old sheriff reached up and pulled that thing down into high gear, and he still had 2 gears left to go, and he was passing that Chevelle that was completely wound out. That's the difference between a police interceptor with a real high-speed rear end and an overdrive transmission and a, you know, big block 409 or whatever it had. Anyway, that was a funny story that I was told by a guy at the school up there. This was a guy that I worked with in 1977 when I was at that shop over here locally. I didn't make a whole lot of money back then, but I learned a lot from this guy. And he's still in charge of a bus shop now, school bus shop. And he's probably one of the best mechanics I have ever known. Intuitive, did some of the best work I've ever seen. He's real crisp, real sharp, and everything he does is done with excellence. And he was like that back then. When this picture was taken, he was 26 years old, so you can figure that out. I was 20 in 1977, and he was 26. And this is the shop where we worked, and you know, even had an old sun scope there. But I just wanted to share that with you. But I got a lot of respect for this guy, and I still talk to him periodically, and we have a good time talking about, you know, politics and car stuff, and reminiscing about the old days and all that. Well, that winds us up this time. We've been here 28 minutes and about 30 seconds, and I hope you guys will come see me next week. Let me know what you think about this. Share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.